institutional and structural racism, we will often say it, but we don't understand what it is. We can't even pinpoint it in our own organization. It's the one that's killing people. If your intention is to reduce harm, then do it the right way. It's making me feel a bit teary saying this because I'm really believe in love. And I want that love for other people because that's what gives me joy when people want to learn this stuff and actually do the work. It means that we are getting closer to being human. And that comes first before money, before anything. My name is Gloria Tabi. I was born and bred in Ghana, west coast of Africa. I had a sense of place and I felt a sense of belonging. There was no questions about it. I knew, I felt it and I lived it. I was raised to look on the positive side of life and never give up. My mother owned a bakery back in Ghana, and the bread that she made used to be food that were given to the poor on the streets. But I didn't understand why Ghana is the way it is. When I was growing up, it was so poor. Not because we didn't work hard. Often when you introduce yourself that you come from Ghana, naturally people think that you're a refugee or something like that. But I actually came to Australia as an economic migrant. I wanted to come and study. Yeah, so I was working in a bakery in a supermarket to pay my way for university. My manager and co-workers were supportive. I thought, how great to have a job. There was often a queue of customers at the bakery. One by one, customers would refuse for me touching their bread. I had to leave the job that I love and suffered emotional traumas and financial setback. The culture shock affected my morale, my confidence, the happy person that I am, into a very conscious person to this day in many respects. Those that are privileged, the world is built for them. They can appear to be who they are and be authentic. This hair that grows on our heads, we've been told that is unruly, unprofessional, ugly, not welcome in professional spaces. I've been told this all my life. This is what a lot of Black African women have to do. Wear a wig in order to present and be in spaces. People like me can't be authentic. We have to hide bits of ourselves to present in spaces. I was often alienated, pushed aside, and treated with disdain. Name-calling, slurs, racial jokes. You begin to believe that you're not worthy. I was morally injured. Researchers have coined a term called weathering. Weathering is like a process of deterioration. Say a paintwork, and over time it weathering. That's what racism does to people. That weathering process and the weathering that happens to people, it just continues without end. It cannot be taken lightly. It kills people. We all wish to think that this kind of thing happened in the 90s. We are more diverse and we talk about diversity, equity and inclusion in the workplace. But the sad fact is, recently, I have suffered exactly the same experience I suffered 20 years ago. Lived experience was coined by France, Fanon. He grew up in France and fought for France. But when they came back from the war, because he was a black psychologist, they mistreated him. He was appalled about how he was treated. Racism is so impactful that sometimes you think you're crazy, that this is not happening. So he was actually helping the black patients to be in touch with their lived experience so that it doesn't ruin their lives. It was not a tool to stop it happening in the first place. Story definitely is important, and we need to hold it in respect. And by sharing my story, some of it really painful, I do that so that you too can be transformative. Using art to portray a problem, and artists are good at that. If they are not censored and they're able to do that, that's powerful. It's taken me 25 years of my God-given life to break free from this. Sorry. What happens to that artist that have just shared their heart out? What happens to them? Whew. Anti-racism practice is about reduction of harm. To be placed in a situation where they have to retell is traumatic. And it's just like, well, why? Why do we need to hear that story? How about we deal with that? What are the tools that we developed to dismantle it? It's like, okay, well, the work hasn't even begun yet. I have spent a good part of my life studying it, but also embodying it as a black woman. And it's only in the last few years I feel qualified to talk about it. There are 4 types of racism. We have systemic racism, institutional racism, interpersonal racism, and internalized racism. All these 4 combined is what create harm. We all have internalized. I have internalized racism. You have it. Growing up thinking that whites are superior, feeling of unworthiness, feeling of not being enough, wearing wig and extensions to feel included in spaces. They're internalized racism. In Australia, the one that we are more familiar with is the interpersonal. It's about what that person has done to me, what that person has said. That's what we like to think. It's all about attitudes. If we can train people so that they can have a better attitude, then racism will be gone. Those things can be hurtful, don't get me wrong, but I do not care what people say. I don't care what you call me on the street, because that's not what causes me disadvantage. By the time that we witness interpersonal racism in the workplace, the damage is already done. We are caught up in discussions and argument with each other. And while we are doing that, the system is perfectly fine doing what it has to do and perpetrating the harm. I don't want to headbutt white people as them being racist. We can relax a little bit, okay? White people are not the problem. This might scare a lot of people, me saying that. They're implicated in racism just like all of us. The system naturally places white people at the top, so they are more in positions of power. So then they are the one perpetrating racism. But if you remove them from that position and you put a person of color in that position, they can perpetrate racism. That's how serious this problem is. What's causing us to have internalized racism and all is the structural and the institutional. We will often say it, but we don't understand what it is. We can't even pinpoint it in our own organization. We like to think Racism is so hard. The system is out there in the vacuum, but it's actually all around us. We are dealing with the system every day. Housing, banking, the justice system, health, the media. The police is an institution. Schools are an institution. They're the huge place where our kids are disadvantaged. The other big end of town is the one that scrutinizes people and surveillance, police brutality. Don't forget, the system is worse. It's the one that's killing people. We need to be gentle on people and harsh on the system. And so if we're really serious about ending racism, then we need to have an expert in there to help us to see how racism shows up in systems, just like we need a psychiatrist or a psychologist to help us with mental health, to stop it from causing further damage. When you become racially aware, it's one of the most powerful tools you will ever invest in. It helps you to navigate the world freely. So freely. It's interesting, I've just gone back to Ghana for a visit, walking on the street in the middle of markets, cars passing by, and seeing other black women in an office situation wearing extensions and wig. And something just snapped in me. It was visceral. I had to actually physically stop walking and looked around me and think, why am I doing this? What's this thing about not being able to just be who we are? Why women in my family have always had to cover their grey hair. I ripped the wig off my head and said to myself, I'm no longer going to wear a wig in order to present and be in spaces anymore. It can be distressing seeing some of the things that you do with racism. It is difficult to handle. Ghana used to be called Gold Coast because we were rich in gold and resources. A lot of our natural resources were taken, but it wasn't just the natural resources, our people were also taken. I've got a sister who's 70 years old. She lived through British inhabitation of Ghana. That's not very long ago. It's frightening. Many migrants, which I'm one of them, or refugees that come to Australia to live, they come here with stories and often trace back to the atrocities and theft, and sometimes they have no choice but to leave. By the time the British left Ghana, the country was decimated in terms of natural resources and human capital. My country will probably rebuild when I'm no longer here because it takes time. And so you need to build that radical hope and work that restores you. And the way to restore that sometimes is disappearing into the bush, and that's what I do. I call it freedom run. And I'll wake up in the morning, just put my running gear and off I go in the bush, walking amongst the trees and the flowers, the plants has become a pure joy of healing. And it's giving me strength. It's giving my life back. And I want to actually take a moment in my surroundings to say, I pay my respect to the Gundungurra people in the Blue Mountains. This beautiful place, somehow it gives you a lot of love back without doing very much. I can truly be myself. It's taking me my whole life to come to this point. This is how I've been made. And I've been made beautifully by whoever the creator is. And I'm going to walk in spaces for who I am.